Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Devin, Hasson, and David Wolman. It is 10:30 on a Monday morning. Hope everybody's week is off to a good start. And yes, we are here to do what we do every Monday, and that is talk some high school football. Going to be a bit of a change of pace from how we've structured, I guess, the first couple months of the podcast. Instead of going back and looking mainly on what happened last week, we're going to use this is a chance, I guess, these next 2 weeks just to kind of take stock in our districts as a whole right now. With 4 weeks left in the regular season, with each week the magnitude of these games is going to amplify just a bit more with respect to district title races, playoff races, and the like. So we're going to just use today as a chance to look at our 5A districts and just kind of take stock in where everybody is at right now. We're just about kind of that midway point of the district schedule for a lot of our conferences. So just kind of see who's in the mix for what, and just kind of what's on the line over this last month of the season. All right, let's why not start with what is, I guess, at the start of the year, what we pegged as pound for pound, maybe our best district overall that we cover, and that is 5A Division I. This, of course, with two teams that are ranked in the state's top 10, with Denton Ryan and Lone Star, and then obviously plenty of talent elsewhere between Frisco ISD, the Colony, and whatnot. So let's see. Let's play a little catch up with 5A Division I. So right now, at this juncture of the schedule, we have Denton Ryan and Lone Star. They are on track for their big showdown at the end of the regular season, which will, for all intents and purposes, probably be for the district title. Denton Ryan is 4-0 in district play right now. Lone Star is 3-0. Then you have a tie for third place between Reedy and Independence at 2-1. And Devin, correct me if I get any of these numbers wrong. I know you got the standings open as well. Then you have Wakeland in fifth place at 3-2 in district play. And you got to kind of keep in perspective that there's bye weeks, and then you had a couple games that fell through at the start of the schedule. So whereas you have Wakeland that's played 5 games versus Reedy and Independence that's played 3, that's just something that you have to kind of deal with this season. But nevertheless, yes. So Wakeland in fifth place at 3-2. Then you have the Colony half game behind at 2-2. They're one game up on Centennial in 7th place at 1-3. Then Heritage is in 8th place at 1-4. Denton High rounding out the mix at 0-5. As we mentioned, it's obviously, we won't get to see what happens between Ryan and Lone Star until the very last night of the regular season in December 4th. But so far, up to this point, those two have pretty much lived up to expectations. Even Lone Star, despite having the unusual 0-2 start to its season, they've righted the ship in a big way with during district play. Their margin of victory right now in their 3 district wins, 45.3. So that is very much getting back on track. That the offense with Garrett Rangel, Jaden Nixon, they're making up for lost time. The offense is averaging 59 points per game in district play, and then you have Red Bryan, who's been just as emphatic.
I was going to say, it's even with the pedigree that Lone Star has, they're going to go into that game as an underdog.
Oh, yeah. Ryan's number 1 in the state. Geyer was able to push them a little bit in that non-district game, but outside of that, Ryan has not really had to break much of a sweat, especially when you look at some of these scores that they've put up against their district opponents. Their defense is allowing less than 10 points per game in district play. So those two appear to be head and shoulders above the rest of the pack. Really, where that intrigue lies, for me at least, is what's going to happen for the 3rd seed, the 4th seed, and how we're going to get to that point, because you've got 3, potentially 4 teams that are all within a reasonable distance of one another with respect to getting those last 2 playoff spots. As I mentioned, you have Reedy and Independence. They're tied at 2-1. Wakeland is 3-2. And David, I don't think you can write off the Colony yet. Even though they had that loss to Wakeland, they're still in the mix at 2-2. With the Colony, obviously they took a bit of a tough one last week to Ryan.
Everybody's going to take a tough loss to Ryan.
Yeah, as is to be expected. But nevertheless, though, as they're about to enter a very pivotal stretch, because they have a number of games over this last month that are against those teams that they're jockeying with in the standings. So, how do you kind of feel right now as far as where the Colony's at this juncture of the season?
I like their progress. I feel like they've had some good spurts at times. Obviously, last week you can just throw out of the window because Denton Ryan's just Denton Ryan. Yeah. But if you took the game a couple weeks ago against Wakeland, they're up by, I think, was it 13-3 in that game? Yeah, and then unfortunately they're up 13-3 in the first quarter, and then unfortunately they had 5 turnovers in that game.
Okay.
So that lead just kind of got out of hand. I think is it Jacob Sousa for Wakeland. He had 3 interceptions in that game, and then Wakeland just had converted 4 of those turnovers into touchdowns right there. And that's the thing that kind of concerns me right now about the Colonies, just the turnovers. They're still a pretty young team.
Yeah.
Like they have 17 new starters this year.
You forget all the talent that they lost from last year.
Yeah, just a few guys who have gone on to Division I schools.
Only their best senior class ever.
Yeah. The road to Frisco has been cut. Has a little road through the Colony now that they have to go through.
Sure.
But it's a team that despite the turnovers, it's a team that if they can just to keep the game close, they're pretty good. I mean, the offensive line's played pretty well at times. They've got 3 really good running backs over there. Actually, 4 if you add in Kylo Taylor, who's a short yardage situation kind of guy, who's a very stout defensive guy playing linebacker for him. I think if they can hold off on the turnovers and they can be able to control the clock, they got Camden Wesley, who's only a sophomore. Yeah. Like a few weeks ago, he had over 180 rushing yards against Centennial.
Okay.
And then also they have Keone Roberson, who's a transfer as well too. He handled the load last week, with Wesley out of the lineup and rushed for over 80 yards and a touchdown against a stout Denton Ryan defense right there. And then obviously it's Roberson. It's not
Jonathan.
Not Jonathan. That's a quarterback. Yeah. Keone Roberson.
Okay.
They're not related at all.
Yeah.
But he's another third option that they bring in right there. So I mean, and obviously Robert Veasley Jr. That was a kid I was thinking about.
Okay.
Robert Veasley Jr. So I mean, if you look at that running back corp selection right there, if they're able to keep the game close, those guys can be able to run for touchdowns.
Devin, what do we kind of make as far as the other teams that are in the mix for that logjam with Reedy, Independence, Wakeland? As far as any common games between those teams right now, Independence has that loss to Reedy. They did bounce back in a huge way the last week against Wakeland. So, kind of, what do you make as far as those other 3 teams that are in the mix for 2 playoff spots?
I mean, that Independence made a huge statement last week.
For sure.
Not just with beating Wakeland, but just dominant. I mean, it was 41-7 at halftime. Yeah. And I think that was kind of a toss-up in our minds going in terms of, we thought Independence might have turned the corner after their 0-3 start. But, yeah, they woke up in a big way. That's kind of, 2 weeks from now, Independence plays the Colony. And I think Reedy's going to be able to take care of business. I think they've shown to be consistent enough. I mean, obviously we talked about the 2 top dogs, but I think that game in 2 weeks with Independence and the Colony, you said don't sleep on the Colony, don't overlook. I think the Colony can, because they also have a date with Reedy down the road.
For sure.
In that week, same week that Lone Star and Ryan play in the season finale. But I really do think that game 2 weeks from now with the Independence and the Colony will tell you a lot about that 4th and final playoff spot.
There's because you look at the schedule and just some of the big games that are left. I mean, we mentioned obviously next Thursday though there's a big one head to head between Reedy and Wakeland as far as kind of sorting out where where those two, and that could essentially be a playoff eliminator. Then the following night you mentioned is going to be Independence and the Colony, and then December 4th, last night of the regular season, Lone Star, Ryan, Reedy, and the Colony. There's one thing though that kind of looms over this as far as potentially making a difference down the road, and that is the element of no contests in this district. Because if you remember at the start of the district play, it looked like it was going to be a bit of a rocky road because there was the confusion over whether there's going to be forfeits or no contests or whatnot. But you've only had 2 games that have not taken place in district play up to this point, and that was it was Lone Star and Independence, and then Reedy versus Denton Ryan. So you think about what that could mean though going forward, because obviously, listen, you want your kids to get to play every opportunity that they can, and nobody wants to have any games that are being canceled related to COVID-19. But if you're going to miss out on on not having to play someone on your schedule, probably not the worst thing that you don't have to line up against one of those 2 juggernauts that are ranked in the state's top 10. So for Reedy and Independence to not have a game against one of those 2 teams on their radar, factoring into their win-loss record, that could be huge going forward. So just something to kind of file away just for down the road as we start getting closer and you start factoring in tiebreakers and the like. But yes, obviously still plenty of football left to be played between those 4 schools that are all vying for what appears to be 2 playoff spots in the district. Let's see. Let's look at. We can stick with 6-5A. We can stick one. Let's do just a quickie on. We'll get to that in just a moment. Let's talk 7-5A Division I, and this district that not sure how much of this looked, how much of these standings kind of, I guess, heading into the season, how we would have forecasted this. But nevertheless, though, if we're just going off of what these records say right now at this juncture of the season, your district frontrunner right now, McKinney North.
That's right.
Shout out to the Bulldogs, the McKinney North, who started off the season 0-3. They've gotten back on track with 3 straight wins during their district schedule. Man, so we'll get to McKinney. All right, we'll get to a little bit more McKinney North in a second. So they are technically a half game, or at least half game up on Highland Park. Highland Park is just 2-0 and whatnot, just because of a bye week and whatnot. So they just haven't had a chance to play as many games as North has. Longview 2-1. You had that highly anticipated game last week between Highland Park and Longview, the 2 projected frontrunners for the district title. Highland Park obviously was able to win that one. It was a bit of a lower scoring game than I think expected, Devin.
Yeah. According to Twitter reports, a little bit sloppy on both sides.
Yeah.
Turnovers, penalties. I know in particular because the Longview Twitter feed was not real happy with the amount of false starts that the team had.
That guy's a little bit opinionated on there.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that was when we talk about potential game, that was the game of the year in 7-5A Division 1. Didn't quite live up to what we thought it was going to be because those are 2 potentially explosive offenses. Nothing wrong with a good defensive grind out, but I think part of it was kind of sloppiness on both sides as well. But Highland Park is able to get that win, and with all due respect to McKinney North, I think the path to the district title for Highland Park is pretty clear now that Longview's out of the way. I still think Longview's the cleared number 2 in that district. I think those 2, as we were talking about, Denton Ryan and Lone Star, it just so happens that they meet in the season finale, which is great for drama and building and whatnot. This was an early district season game between these 2, but I still think that they both run the table, just kind of looking at the way the rest of the district plays out, despite McKinney North's 3-0 start. But that doesn't take anything away from what they've done.
No.
What they've done is position themselves to be the third-place team in that district and to be a playoff team, which some people didn't necessarily think before the season started with what they lost and what they were coming through. But you look, their 3 wins are against the teams at the bottom of the standings, but those are tiebreaker advantages later on. So they're very well positioned. As far as that 4th spot goes, God, that's tough. I mean, Tyler, I guess, would have to get the edge right now based on their win over West Mesquite. West Mesquite's just been kind of a hard luck bunch. Frank Sandoval in his first year as the head coach, they're playing hard. They're playing well. They just, they lost to McKinney North 35-32. They had a chance potentially to tie it late and just couldn't get it done. But they're not getting blown out, and that's the big thing. I mean, even against Longview, they were competitive. They didn't just get run off the field and lose 75-0 like some of these games that Longview's played against district foes in the past. So you got to give Tyler the slight edge there, but it's again as far as marquee matchups to come. The big showdown was last week.
As far as the rest of the standings, you mentioned Tyler. They're currently tied with Sherman in 4th place at 1-1. We just mentioned West Mesquite. Them and Wiley East are tied at 0-3. Yeah, with respect to McKinney North, there probably wasn't a team in the district that played a more just high-wire first 2.5 games of district play than this McKinney North team. We talked about their district opener against Tyler, that they were able to win 34-24 in a game where they got touchdowns on both defense and special teams, got all 3 phases to chip in for a much-needed victory there. That game against West Mesquite, you mentioned, went right down to the wire. So, yeah, West Mesquite was driving for a chance to potentially tie the game late. Then, with a few seconds left, they got called for an intentional grounding that forced a runoff of the remaining seconds on the game clock and then allowed McKinney North to escape with a 35-32 victory. And then McKinney North was tied at halftime, 17-17, with Wiley East last week. And then North, probably for the first time in maybe all season, that second half against Wiley East was really the first consistent stretch where it's looked like the offense of old from last season, that offense that just put up numbers almost at will. They outscored the Raiders 35-14 over the last 2 quarters. They got another special teams touchdown, so they just apparently have a knack for finding other points elsewhere beyond just the offense. It was Jacoby Ballas who gave them a kickoff return for a touchdown. They've had to dig a little bit deep into their running back depth chart. They were actually having to use a converted wide receiver, Taylor Offord, in the backfield against Wiley East. He ran for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. J.J. Henry's good for at least one highlight reel play a game, it seems. He's having a spectacular season. And, it has set them up in a position where now they still have to play Highland Park and Longview. So
this week will tell you a lot about just how good McKinney North is.
This is because they have HP coming up later this week.
I'm at HP
at
too,
HP, yes, where they're virtually invincible unless you have Marvin Mims or you're Pulaski Academy. They're pretty much untouchable in Highlander Stadium. I'm more so looking at this game next week against Sherman as far as being the one that could potentially lock things up for good. It's been a matchup that has given North some trouble in the past, and it's but yeah, I mean, just you look at the nature of the standings right now, and that is a spot where if you're able to get a win over Sherman, it would assure you pretty much no worse than a third place finish. Which, given what this team battled through at the start of the season and how much they've lost on offense from last year, Coach Fetchy will take that. Every day of the week and twice on Sundays if they're able to get third place in a district this up and down. So that's kind of a look as far as where things are at right now in District 7 5A Division 1. Did want to, a quick note on kind of where things are at with Carrollton-Farmers Branch ISD and their two districts. I got to see Creekview in person. We can actually just quickly pivot to 5A Division 2 for this one, 4-5A Division 2 specifically. I got to see Creekview a couple weeks ago against, it was Fort Worth Southwest. I get a lot of those Fort Worth ISD schools a little confused since they all look vaguely similar. And this was one that they lost 61-7, and that's kind of been the story for at least the first month of their season. Offense has just been a chore for the Mustangs. Through their first 4 games, just 17 points. There was a stretch where they kicked a field goal, I believe it was in the second quarter of their Week 2 game against Irving Nimitz, and then from that point up until the second half against Fort Worth Southwest, they surrendered over 150 unanswered points. I mean, it was it was tough. And now they did, they weren't able to find the win column, and it was, it meant getting back on track in a bit of a heartbreaking fashion. But the offense did come to life in a big way last week against South Hills. They lost this game 52-51, and fair play to Creekview because they were down 22-0 after the first quarter in this. And for a run-based offense, that's kind of a death knell if you're down 22-0 really at any point in a football game. But they were able to come back, make this a game late. But they had an extra point blocked late that ended up keeping them down by 1 point in the end. But nevertheless, though, for a team that, again, scored 17 points for the first month of their season, to get 51 points, they got 5 total touchdowns from their quarterback, Garrett Palacio. And then, it was all 7 of his completions went to the same receiver. They got a big target out wide. Yeah. They got a big target out wide in Sean Salas, who gave them a pretty productive night. He had 7 catches for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns. They got 128 rushing yards and a couple scores from David Thompson, a guy who they were pretty optimistic about coming into the season. They've had to kind of make do without their expected bell cow in the backfield, Edgar Page, and whatnot. So it's been a tough start to them. Nevertheless, they're 0-5 overall, 0-3 in district play. There are, you look at the rest of their schedule, and there are going to be certainly games that project to be a bit more competitive for them, a little bit to the tune of this game against South Hills. Unfortunately, the loss against South Hills is going to make the playoffs a bit of a chore for them, even if they were to run the table down the home stretch. But it all just needs to happen up front for them, and that was probably the part that stood out more than anything in that game against Southwest, was just how they got overwhelmed on the line of scrimmage. And for a flexbone offense, you kind of need to be able to play your opponent to at least a draw there in the trenches in order to get that run game going. But there were just way too many times where even if they were to fake and go play action, where Palacio, he goes back, turns around, he's already got 3 Southwest defenders right in his face. And so it's got to happen up front for them. It's been, they graduated a pretty massive senior class from last year. Over 30 seniors they lost, including a quarterback, Brett Esch, who had been in that system for a long time, plus their best offensive lineman, Jack Parker, who actually is committed to Air Force. So, they've certainly had some talent there up front in years past. It's just been a rough go for them, nevertheless. With Newman Smith and R.L. Turner, though, if we go back to 5A Division 1, over in 6-5A Division 1, there's Lancaster is doing what we all kind of expected. Their average margin of victory to this point has been almost 65 points per game. They've had numerous 80-point performances by the offense. You knew this was going to happen. You knew they were going to lay waste to that district, and they weren't really going to get pushed, so much during district play. So they've been as advertised, only 13 points allowed total in their 4 district ball games. But that's the thing is, like, with, you knew that there was going to be a tax that, okay, you're going to take your 7-8 touchdown loss to Lancaster, but the rest of the district's going to be pretty competitive elsewhere. As far as the way that those standings have shaken out, at least as far as the the top 6-7 teams go, you've got Woodrow Wilson, who's 4-0 as well. Now, they have not played Lancaster, obviously. W.T. White at 3-1. Bryan Adams in 4th place at 2-2. Then you've got a tie for 5th place between Molina and New 2-3. Actually, take it back, a 3-way tie because R.L. Turner is in that mix too. They are 2-3. And then you have Samuel at 1-4 in 8th place and Sunset at 0-4 in 9th place. Of those 2 CFB ISD schools, I think there's at least a pathway to the postseason for Newman Smith. They've got wins right now over Bryan Adams and R.L. Turner, losses to Lancaster, Woodrow Wilson. The one against Molina could loom large down the stretch, though, just because those 2 teams are tied, and Molina was able to get them. I believe 21-8 was the final in that game. But you look at the rest of their schedule. There's a lot of they still have to play Samuel, still have to play Sunset, so there's going to be opportunities for them to move up the standings, and you want to use that win against Bryan Adams, as much as possible to your advantage for tiebreaker purposes versus Molina. You don't want to obviously have any scenario where you have to use that 13-point loss, in any sort of playoff tiebreaker equation. With Newman Smith, they've been splitting reps at quarterback between Doug Hill and Alejandro Diaz. Hill has actually been their leading rusher. The big revelation for them, though, on offense has been at wide receiver, where Kylan Woods is number 6 in the area right now among 5A pass catchers. He's got 537 receiving yards to this point, so he has been such a boost for them. And like I said, there is at least a pathway to the postseason. For R.L. Turner, it was really tough to kind of figure out what to make with this program coming into the season, not only because they had a brand new head coach in Michael Farda, but just because they had such an abbreviated summer because of COVID-related shutdowns and county health orders and whatnot, that this is a team that was really they weren't even sure heading into the season really who was going to be where, just because they just didn't have a whole lot of time to really work together. But you've seen it at least at the start now. One of those wins is a forfeit. They were able to get a forfeit win against Sunset, but they were able to get an actual outright win against Samuel, 13-12. And I believe if you look over the box score from that game, Turner didn't pass the ball one time. It was exclusively a run game. Probably took like an hour and a half to finish. But they've attempted only 21 passes all season. It's really been the work in the backfield of Antoine Corona and Donovan Smith that has really shouldered the load for them as far as the run game goes. Like I said, they've got those 2 wins, but the losses have been to W.T. White, Newman Smith, and Bryan Adams, teams that are right there in the thick of things as far as that. So, those are the ones that are probably going to come back to bite you. So I'm not really sure if there's as clear a path as there is for Newman Smith right now. But nevertheless, though, for R.L. Turner, this season's just about just laying some sort of foundation. And at the surface, you have your first multi-win season since 2016. This is a program that was stuck in a bit of a, they were coming off back-to-back 0-10 seasons. Just so to have some sort of forward momentum right now in that district is, that's really all that Coach Farda was hoping for out of this first season. So up to this point, it's hard to really quibble with what they've shown so far. So that's a look at 6-5A Division I as far as where things are at for Carrollton-Farmers Branch ISD. Let's talk about our other big old heavyweight Frisco district over in 7-5A Division II. This one, David, you actually just got to see our Lovejoy in a bit, so I'll defer to you in a moment for some thoughts on Lovejoy. Sure. Because right now, and again, this is because one team has played one more game than the other in district play. Lovejoy is in first place right now in this district. They're 4-0. They're blowing and going under new head coach Chris Ross, and they have technically a half game lead on Frisco. State ranked Frisco, I believe, is number 5 in the 5A Division II state rankings. They're 3-0 in district play. Those two lead the pack there. You have Frisco Liberty, who's been one of the biggest surprise stories in the area. They are 4-1 in district play. They are a half game up on Denison, who's in 4th place at 3-1. You've got Lebanon Trail in 5th place at 2-2. Princeton, who's been on a bit of a COVID shutdown recently, they are just 1-1 in district play in 6th place. And then you have a 3-way tie for 7th between Memorial, Lake Dallas, and Rock Hill, all at 0-4 in district play. So let's talk a little bit of Lovejoy.
Let's do it.
Yeah, you got to see this offensive juggernaut in person last week as they made short work out of Frisco Memorial. So David, what was kind of your big takeaway from getting to see this Lovejoy offense in person, and just what did they show you on Thursday?
They're just a well-oiled machine.
For real.
It started up front with on the offensive line with these guys, because even like when it looked like they're doing like a short running play, they would get 4 or 5 yards every play.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, it started up front. You have Gage Harrison, Trent Robinson, Gavin Burkhardt, Parker Braithwaite, and Dylan Breaux on the offensive line, and this they had almost 500 yards of offense in that game right there.
That's kind of been par for the course, it feels like.
What's that?
That's kind of been par for the course so far, it feels like.
It has, yeah. So I guess they just followed this script again against a Memorial team that's just, had so many close losses this year.
For sure.
And the thing that, it just clicked from the start right here. Lovejoy scored on each of their first 7 possessions right there. And they had control of this game from the get-go. It seems like early on they were just intent on getting the deep threat going on right there with Reed Westervelt. And he got a couple of touchdowns there in the first quarter out there. And I'm trying to think who else they have. Jackson Lavender and Luke Mayfield. I mean, he got them involved as well too. They both had touchdowns as well too. Lavender and Mayfield, they combined for 145 yards on just 9 receptions right there.
Wow.
Yeah. So if it's not just Westervelt. It's not just Westervelt that you have to worry about. It's these guys as well too. So I mean, it shows not only the passing game, but they can run the ball as well too. It was a pretty balanced attack. They had over 200. They had 217 rushing yards as well too. Isaiah Smith is always a threat whenever he's down on the goal run right there. He carried not 20 times, but he had 2 touchdowns and almost 100 yards. And then if it's not just Isaiah Smith that you're having to worry about, it's Matthew Maynard. And he got 85 yards on 24 carries right there. And so this is a team that can just beat you in so many ways. And obviously R.W. Rucker, who's their quarterback right there, we saw what he did his junior year. And it seems like he's continuing to, involve his game even more this year. On Thursday night, he only attempted 18 passes, but he completed 15 of them, and he actually had more touchdowns than incomplete passes.
Man,
so yeah, so this is a Lovejoy team, that's 6-0. I feel like they're going to contend with Frisco for the top spot in the district, and those 2 teams actually meet next week.
Yeah, it's a fun one on the docket pretty soon between Lovejoy and Frisco. Lovejoy's offense up to this point averaging 49.3 points per game in district play. They did get to survive their little dose of adversity, a few weeks ago against Denison, where they were down heading into the 4th quarter, had to mount a bit of a comeback there. They were able to survive that trip out to Munson Stadium. So they've you mentioned Reed Westervelt. He's currently leading the area in receiving yards among 5A pass catchers. 703 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns. Rucker, he's 4th in passing with 1467 through the air. The big stat with him, though, only 1 interception. There's no other quarterback in the top 10 in the area that can say that. So he's been very, very efficient with the football. We saw this with Coach Ross at Red Oak at his previous stop, where he was only there for 2 years, but he turned that program around in a heartbeat. And this is just kind of his impact. And he's got Lovejoy off to its best start in a long time. And yes, we'll finally get the long-awaited matchup between them and Frisco. That game is next week, and I believe it is in Frisco, yes. Yeah. And there's a number of big games that we still have left to go, because Frisco, they've got a game against Denison coming up on Friday, and that's the Denison team that is actually the last team to beat Frisco in district play. That was that weird game last year that was only 10-7. So, it's, and a lot of those same pieces are still intact for Denison, so that's a game of intrigue later this week. So as far as kind of elsewhere in those in the standings right now, that Lovejoy and Frisco have kind of separated themselves as kind of the top 2 in some order. With Liberty, Devin, they've been such a fun story this year with the emergence of Keldrick Luster as just this stat-stuffing superhero of a quarterback. But last week, though, they had to dig a little bit deep because they did not have Luster in the lineup, and they were.
How about Will Glatch?
Yeah, and that's the thing. What
a luxury to have, though.
They were able to pull out it was 40-35 over Lebanon Trail in the game, and they actually were down parts, so they had to mount a bit of a comeback in this one. But yeah, if you're not going to have your starting quarterback, why not just go to the guy who started all 10 games for you last season in Will Glatch, and he was able to help them pace the way to the victory. Jonathan Bone, huge game for him, 200 yards rushing. But nevertheless, though, what do you kind of make of this Liberty team up to this point? This was your of our preseason podcast, and this was your bold prediction that Liberty was going to be able to make the playoffs after 1-9 or 0-10 last season, or they had a rough year last year in 5.5A Division I. So the drop down to classification, it has done wonders for this program.
Yeah, and obviously I think last week was a defining win just because of where it puts them in the standings.
Yeah.
I mean, they control their own destiny. I think a win like that without your starting quarterback, to be able to rally from a deficit. I mean, there's just so many ways that builds that team's confidence,
for sure.
For what they were able to do last week. It's not done yet. There's still work to do. But, in terms of, I mentioned the confidence, but also, potential tiebreakers down the road. I think that win is huge. Going forward, now I don't know the status of Kendrick Luster. I don't know what his future. I don't know exactly if this is a one-game thing or if this is a long-term thing. But like you mentioned, to be able to pull a guy off the defensive side of the ball, where Will Glatch is one of the leading tacklers on the team. He's excelled, on that side. But to be able to call on a guy that has that experience, and obviously he showed it last week with a tremendous performance. We talked about the Lovejoy Frisco game in 2 weeks. That same night, Denison and Lebanon Trail play.
Yeah.
And I think that may be for your fourth and final playoff spots.
Mm-hmm.
Denison still could make some noise toward the top of the district, particularly if they were able to repeat their upset of Frisco. Mm-hmm. But I think based on what, I think Lovejoy and Frisco have kind of separated themselves as the top tier. But I think Lebanon Trail, despite losing last week, they're right there. Mm-hmm. They're on the cusp. And this is
absolutely.
This is a team that's a program that's continued to grow. They're making strides. And they're right there. I mean, if that comeback didn't happen last week, we're talking about Lebanon Trail potentially being able to compete for the district title. So I think that, that same night as the big showdown at the top, I think that Lebanon Trail Denison game in 2 weeks is going to be huge.
Yeah, that's something that just needs to be kind of kept in perspective. This is just a third-year varsity program. Yeah. So for them to already be in position to just say they're even in position to qualify for the playoffs in a district that is this talented with so many experienced programs, it's certainly a good spot for the Trailblazers to be in, regardless of how the next few weeks go. With Liberty, you look at those, especially those last 2 weeks of the season, when they're at Denison on November 27th, and then they host Lovejoy on December 4th. So if they're able to have Luster back in the lineup, then those are potentially ones where you could, elevate your standing to potentially as high as a top 2 seed. But Liberty has been blowing and going so far. They've looked spectacular. David, obviously not the season that Coach Young over at Lake Dallas envisioned for his Falcons. They're 0-4 in district play right now, and they were able to score a bit on Denison last week, but that Denison ground game just a little bit too much. So, with them right now, what do you kind of make as far as where Lake Dallas is at as they try to find some way to just to save a little bit of face there down the stretch?
I think that's a team that's like it's still a very young team. They got a lot of sophomores on this team. Mm-hmm. We're discovering the resurgence of this young running back named Andre Minifield.
Yeah.
He's had over 160 yards, a couple times. I remember the game I saw against Lebanon Trail, even though the game was a little bit out of hand, he still had a huge touchdown catch. Mm-hmm. It was over 50 yards. And that was a time when Lake Dallas was really struggling, to generate big plays. So I think going forward, he's going to be one of your top threats, going vertically. Mm-hmm. And he can do both, running and passing as well, and receiving, I should say. And for Lake Dallas, I think they just, it seems like, the playoffs is, it seems like it's kind of out of the question right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, just the way how things are going. You obviously had that strong start to the season against Denton, but it seems like it's just been a struggle ever since, they've had some trouble. They've been able to string together some drives, but just being able to finish some drives and being able to hold on to leads, that's something that's been a little bit concerning as well too. But I mean, going forward, I think I think they kind of see what they're looking for into their future. I think they're trying to finish the season strong. It's not about wins or losses from right now. It's just building for next year because they do have some really good talent, coming back next year. Even though Trevor Moon's their starting quarterback and he's a senior, their backup quarterback, Brendan Sorsby, who's a junior, he's coming and doing some good things in relief as well too. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we want to see how he's going to, handle the last few weeks of the season right there. Obviously, Minifield's one option, and then Micaiah Brooks, he had a touchdown earlier in the season against Denton. He's maybe a deep threat for you early earlier, going forward. So I think for now, for Lake Dallas, it's just an opportunity to see what you got for the future.
And there's a couple games, down the stretch for them that should be at least a little bit more winnable in terms of getting into
I
the
think
district
next week against Prosper Rock Hill, and then the following week against, I think, Memorial.
Yeah, Memorial. Yeah, because they don't have their bye week until the last week of the regular season.
They play 10 straight weeks.
Yeah,
actually, they don't this year because they had that the COVID against Princeton.
It's been a pretty seamless district schedule as far as games happening. Only Princeton, which has come under a recent 2-week shutdown for COVID reasons. Games against Lake Dallas and Frisco, have not materialized for the Panthers in that respect. But yes, a look at 7-5A Division II. We can close out then, Devin, with a look over at 6-5A Division II with Mesquite Poteet in a district that is, you talk about, if we've only had just one shutdown to worry about in 7-5A Division II, it has been the exact opposite in this district. I don't even know the total number of games that have been decided by forfeit, but it is a ton.
And not all of them are COVID related. Yeah. Some of them have just been programmed that they decided that we're not going to play this week. Yeah. It's crazy. And again, this is the DISD. We don't have a lot of, don't often have a team with the DISD schools. A lot of times they're in their own district by themselves. Yeah. But this is a district that's proven to be very top heavy, like we thought. Mm-hmm. We thought it was going to be even though if you look at the standings right now, you have South Oak Cliff and Kimball tied for first place, but the district championship was settled a couple weeks ago when Poteet and South Oak Cliff played. I think South Oak Cliff obviously won that game. I do think that even though Kimball is 4-0, I think Poteet's the second best team in that district. They play in week 11. Yeah. I think that'll be for the second seed. I thought, maybe Seagoville might be a little bit of a problem for Poteet, but they got beat by Hillcrest last week, 55-38. A Hillcrest team that Poteet beat by 30 early in the season, so not so much anymore. I do think, Hillcrest, that gives them the edge on the fourth playoff spot, but in terms of the district title, it's hard to see anybody beating Sock. Their defense is just tough, and they held a very good Poteet offense. Jalen Police is one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in terms of being run-pass guys in the area, and they just smothered him for the most part. I do think Poteet, though, can close strong and be that second seed, and I think Poteet's a team that, people are going to kind of look at that district and say Sock, but Poteet's a team that can be able to come out there and surprise some people once the playoffs roll around.
As far as the standings go right now, you have Kimball and South Oak Cliff tied for first place at 4-0. Poteet one game back at 3-1. Seagoville in fourth place, 3-2. Hillcrest fifth place at 2-2. Then you have Spruce in sixth place at 2-3. A seventh place tie between Conrad and Thomas Jefferson at 1-4, and Adamson in ninth at 0-4. Just as far as just all the forfeits, just as an example as to how it's impacted one specific school schedule. Thomas Jefferson has played, technically they have 5 district games on record. 4 of them have been decided by forfeit. Right now it's a bit of a everything below those top 3 is a bit of a head-scratcher week in, week out as far as how many of those games are even going to get played. But right now it does feel like you at least have an idea as to who the top 3 are as far as the big games remaining, though. Kimball, we get to learn a lot about Kimball those last 2 weeks of the season, because that's when November 28th is when they play South Oak Cliff. Both teams project to be unbeaten heading into that big showdown there in the penultimate week of the regular season. And then, as you said, Devin, things wrap up December 4th between Poteet and Kimball in a game that could very well be for the 2 seeds. So that's a look at where things are at right now in 6-5A Division II, and that is a look at where things are at just in our 5A districts in general. Like I said, still plenty more to go over these next 4 weeks of football, and plenty to be decided with respects to district titles, playoff berths, all that good stuff. But yes, nevertheless, a look at where things stand as the home stretch draws near. So yes, that'll be it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. We'll be back on Thursday. Until then, folks, you take care, and we will talk to y'all later.